Hello and welcome to the Contemptibles podcast. I'm your host, Jake Brown. Today I'm joined by Pete Neal, who's been on previous episodes. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about the Christmas truce of 1914. So Pete's going to take it away with the first bit because this is like a specialist subject. And he's going to sort of overview of what the led up to the Christmas truce, etc., and what it was like going into December.
Right. So what we're dealing with here is we're dealing with the pre-war professional army. Okay, so that's also what makes this event quite special as well, because they're professional soldiers. These aren't conscripts and they're not volunteers who are signing up for a cause to go and fight a specific person. These blokes are hardcore regulars. Most of them have probably done maybe 2 to 3 years service on average already before the war's even started. So they're very good at what they do. So with that being said, so we're going to go back to the early days of the First World War. So these blokes have been heavily engaged in quite a lot of major actions. So we're looking at the Battle of Mons. So that's their first major action where they're fighting at Mons. Plus they got the retreat from Mons. So they retreated from Mons to the outskirts of Paris. So they marched something like 200 miles. That's a fighting withdrawal as well. That's not just like they've decided, you know what, we'll just do one, shall we? Because the French already did that, so we had to fight our way back to the where we got to. But then we pushed up to the Marne. So not only had they just done a fighting withdrawal, they then did a push from the way they just come about 50 miles. So they did that push, held the line. And then then it was this famous race to the sea. But the thing is, it weren't that race to the sea as such. It was a race to the sea, but it was a case of they were trying to flank each other. All right. So one was trying to go around the other, and it just ended up, they just kept on stopping each other all the way up till they got to the coast. And they were doing it the other way, all the way down to Switzerland as well. So with that being said, we now come up to Ypres. So we're now coming up to the first Battle of Ypres. So there's going to be four different battles of Ypres eventually over the course of the war, but this is the very first one. So this is during November time in 1914, where the British Army, by this point, they've suffered a lot of casualties. Remember, they've just fought through Mons, the retreat from Mons, and they pushed up to the Marne. Plus, they've now moved their way up to the up to Belgium, or Ypres, or Wipers, as it become known as by the lads. So while they're there, the Germans are now going to put in another counter-attack to try and push us out of Ypres and to basically try and cut us off from Calais and all the rest of it. So at that point, at the worst point of the battle, there was nothing behind us at all. It was literally anybody and everybody who could carry a rifle had to get up to the front line to try and plug those gaps. Which we did, obviously, because the war didn't finish and the Germans didn't win. But once the first Battle of Ypres had finished, we then made our line. Obviously, through that, with tactics of the time, you dig in. So they started digging in. So they started making shell scrapes. Obviously, these shell scrapes then became like a fighting trench. We'd have like 2-3 men in it. Obviously, then that developed. They then start connecting these little slit trenches together. And obviously, before you know it, a trench system is forming. Not the type of trench system that we're going to most commonly relate to the First World War. These are more like ditches in the ground, almost like drainage ditches. Even in some instances as well, they're actually using drainage ditches as well. So they've actually just jumped into a drainage ditch and they just connected all that together. So now we're moving up to December. Obviously, November, December top. The winter's already started anyway come November, but come December, the winter has now set in. So these trenches are quite shallow in places. Obviously, that part of Europe, water table's not very good either. So a lot of these blokes, they could be sat in about 2-3 foot worth of water. So life for them in these slit trenches, in these primitive trenches, are quite grim. So they're up to their knees in water, in mud. They're not being drained very well, not like you'll see in a few years' time, where because obviously they're still learning their lessons. So all these things they need to learn. So we're going to eventually they'll start having pumps, so they'll be able to pump water out, and then there'll be proper drain, like a type of drainage system actually running through the trenches, so to try and counteract this flooding issue. obviously life ain't too good for them. They're wet, they're miserable, and that's literally their life at this moment in time. Obviously, they are making improvements to this trench network that they're creating, but there's not, for them, it is quite grim. So leading up to the early Christmas period, let's say the sort of 19th, a series of offensives go on. So the problem that we've got, and we have this problem through quite a lot of the war, is that the French army is the dominant army in the sense of numbers. So we kind of fall under like a French command, although whoever's running our army at the time, so in 1914, it was Sir John French was running the army at the time. He was always at loggerheads with the French all the time because they were saying, we want you to do this, we want you to do that. And he's going, no, that's ridiculous behavior. What do you think you're doing?
Yeah, because he was also in loggerheads with his corps commanders, which was Haig and Smith Dorrien as well. So it creates even more of a frustration because Smith Dorrien took over from his predecessor, who basically suffered a heart attack not long into getting to France as well. So it's even more annoyance there as well. So yeah.
Yeah, and the problem with the French as well, they're still in that mindset of let's push the Germans out, because the other thing you've got to remember is the French, not the French, but France has been invaded. They've set their marker, and where they've now made their line, they've still been invaded. So they want to push the Germans out their country. So they've got something to fight for in that sense of we want to push you out the country. British soldier, he's there to fight. That's all he's there to do. So he's quite happy to sit and wait the winter out for the campaign season to start in the spring. Exactly. So traditionally, that's what the British Army does. Come spring, you start your campaign season. During the winter, you refit, you just get rid of the winter, and then you start fighting again. So they're more than happy just to sit it out. So, and that's what and this is what French is saying to the French. Bit of a mouthful then. So he's saying to us like, no, we've got to wait till spring now because that's what we do. It's the British Army, and this is what we do. Because why? Because we do. So, but with that, the French have gone, no, we need offensives. We need you to push them out. It's like, so on the 19th of December, some little offensives. It doesn't happen on the whole line. There's little areas that will have these offensives that you got down. The French sector is quite lively down the French sector. Then if you move up to Ypres, predominantly one springs to mind is Plug Street. There's an offensive that goes in there on a place called the Birdcage, the London Rifle, the Rifle Brigade. Sorry, not the London Rifle Brigade, but there is elements of the London Rifle Brigade with them. But I'll go into that in a minute. So these little offensives are springing up everywhere. But the thing is, these, like I said, they weren't like big sector assaults all the time. These are like 2 or 3 battalions doing a push. And the thing is, they haven't got the artillery like they will do later on in the war. So there's no real support there. So these blokes are going over the top. So they're wet, they're cold, they're annoyed, and they're now going to go and try and push an enemy out that's entrenched. And they're not got the support they need because they haven't got the artillery support. So these assaults don't really go anywhere. But in Plug Street, I said when up by Prowse Point, they assault the Birdcage, and they did take part of the Birdcage for a little while. But the thing was, because there was only one platoon there, one platoon made it, but they couldn't hold it because they didn't get the support they needed because all the other platoons that were supposed to be leading up were either getting cut to pieces or they were getting pinned down by machine gun fire. These are regular soldiers. These aren't these people that are going to go, yes, we're going to go and charge a machine gun. If you're being shot at, you're going to keep your head down until you can solve a way of getting around it. Exactly. So that's happened now. So now we're coming into Christmas time. So with those little offences that happen, like places like Plug Street, and other places, I think there's a couple down in like Champagne region. So now the Christmas set and winters, so the frost is starting to set in as well for these blokes. And here we go. And then this is where we come into the actual story of the truce. So that's your little bit of background into the kind of lead up to why it kind of was, to get that picture in your head to why this could potentially happen.
I think for anyone, you need, as you obviously explain, the background really does make a difference in what's sort of been happening up until that point. And the fact that these are regular soldiers, they're there to do a job. They're not there for like the sort of causes you would see later on in the war, would say the volunteer force, the conscription force, etc., 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 or the kitchen of volunteers, say. So it's a sort of mindset of why these sort of stories come about along the Western Front. Well, obviously not across the whole of the Western Front, but in certain pockets, etc. Mostly would say British, but some spots with French and Belgium. But yeah, it really comes into sort of the aspect of why these things happen at Christmas.
Oh, absolutely. Also, by this point as well, by Christmas, because obviously the British Army's, well, the British Army isn't the British Army like it was. As I said, there have been all these major engagements they've been involved in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So obviously they need themselves to be refitted. So yes, you're getting those new volunteers that are coming in. So these are the blokes who have gone down to the recruiting station and gone, I want to go and fight for my country. So you are getting this sort of trickle of blokes arriving at the front.
Yeah.
The thing is, that's the other thing. So a lot of people are under this assumption that it's like, right, you're gonna have 2 weeks training, you're gonna learn your left from your right and be sent off to the Western Front. No, a lot of these blokes who signed up in 1914, they're not going to see the Western Front until 1915.
Exactly.
Because they need to train them. They're not going to send blokes to war.
Yeah. And most of the reinforcements they're getting are from the territorial force that has been retraining in England prior to going out. Obviously, because they've been doing occasional training before the war, etc., with their territorial service and reserves as well, and then getting back into the swing of things. Because I think a lot of the guys who sort of went out to France ended up spending a lot of time in literally brand new equipment, brand new boots, and it wasn't exactly great for them. But it was getting back into the whole thing. But they were still hard guys who had previous service under their belts, who still knew what the aim of the game was, really.
Yeah, that's a good point what you brought up about the territorials, because that's where I mentioned earlier about the London Rifle Brigade being at Prowse Point with the Rifle Brigade, because what they're doing, like you said, they were bringing in the reserves now. So they're bringing the modern day reserves, but back then they were called the Territorial Army. So these territorials are now starting to steadily deploy to the Western Front. So one such instance is Prowse Point. So you got, but they're doing it sort of company at a time, because they're not going to send the whole battalion in there, because they need to be trained as well. So yeah, they got the sort of fundamentals, the Billy basics of soldiering, but these blokes in the right side of these blokes on the Rifle Brigade, they've been fighting, they've been living in the trench for the last 2 months. So they're starting to get into their own little routines on their new way of doing things. And that's what they're doing. So they're bringing up these companies each time for their little tour to train them in their way of life now. This ain't open warfare anymore, mate. We're entrenched, and this is how we've got to do it. This is what we've learned so far, and that's what they're doing with these territorials, and that's across the board as well. That's not just what was happening in the Rifle Brigade, but all the territorial regiments that were going over were getting twinned up with these regular battalions to learn this new way of fighting as well.
Yeah, it's a very sort of difficult situation to be in, really, and getting into not just combat, but these sort of situations where some of them had seen action, say in South Africa, in the Boer Wars, the Sudanese campaigns, or even, for example, like people like Smith Dorrien's case had seen action in the Anglo-Zulu Wars, etc. This was a very different type of warfare, and they're getting thrown into battle against a far numerically superior enemy, and really sticking to their owners really as well. So going into sort of the Christmas period, it was very much a case of, we need a rest. We need and the truces they made, we need a rest. We need to just cop up this for a day or two, just so we can, have a bit of relax, because it's been absolutely hard work up until that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what it was. In my opinion, I think that's what that it was an excuse. But they were trying to find that excuse. so they're sat there, they're sat there going like, we need a day off from this. They are doing they are being rotated. It's not, again, one of those other myths of the First World War. Bloke goes to the Western Front and he'll spend 4 years in mud for the rest of his life. No, they are rotating them, so they will get that time off where they'll get time to go down the estaminets and soak in the local culture, so to speak.
definitely soaking some cultures.
But then when they're going up onto the line, especially with the weather being like it is, you just got to think you're sat there going, I just want a day off, really.
Exactly.
And that's the other thing. They're still, like I said, they're still learning those lessons of the rotations as well. So luckily at this point, they are now going, we can't keep blokes in this weather for a week out there in this weather. So now you are starting to see this sort of like 48-hour period where blokes are going to the line for 48 hours. So even in some instances, it could be even by battalion. So the whole battalion would rotate itself. So it won't be a case of a battalion comes off and another battalion goes in. It could be by companies. So half the battalion could be up on the line. 48 hours later, boom, the other half of the battalion's gone up to the line. So they are trying to rotate them and try and warm them up a little bit. So bring them back off the line a bit, warm them up. But yeah, that's I just think they wanted a day off, and the Germans gave them the perfect excuse for one.
Exactly. Because I think, especially like for guys who'd been through the early campaign in late August and going into September with that ridiculous heat that it was described as like a scorching summer, say like 35 degrees upwards, and guys who've been through that definitely needed a rest then, let alone several months down the line where some of them are like, yes, they've been rotated in and out kind of, but to that point, so they definitely needed like a decent rest. So it was definitely a case of we've had enough of this crap for a few months, let's give us a day or two.
Yeah, absolutely. So we come into Christmas Eve, and that's where it all starts for us, isn't it? So these veteran accounts of blokes going out onto work parties from our side, that is. So they were going out doing wiring, things like that, and nothing was happening. There's in some instances, there's the odd pop shot here and there, but they were like, there was I can't remember who it was now, what regiment he was in. I want to say he was a rifleman, but I don't think he was. But he was out in no man's land, and obviously the days of the screw picket don't exist yet. So those the barbed wire the pegs for barbed wire, the hoops in with the big corkscrew on the bottom, they don't exist yet. For rigging up barbed wire, they're using wooden posts. So obviously a wooden post makes a lot of noise, doesn't it, when you're trying to hammer one in? Doesn't matter how quietly you're trying to do it, it's going to make a bit of noise. And he was saying that they were hitting it, so they were like whacking the top, getting on the belt buckles, thinking they're going to get shot at, and nothing was happening. So they did it again, got on the belt buckles, nothing happened, and they ended up knocking out these stakes that they're meant to, put the wire up, and they said they did get a bit confident by that point. They're like, yeah, nothing's going to happen here, and they then got on with the job and put this wire up, and they're like, this is weird. They at that time they're going, this is weird, this is really bizarre. Then they obviously went back to their trench and they said, yeah, nothing happened out there, this is ridiculous. So I don't know what's going on out there. Then also in other parts of the line, obviously because the Germans celebrate Christmas a little bit different, obviously a lot of our traditions come from them, doesn't it? It's all the big Victorian Christmas, isn't it? So the Germans, they start singing Christmas carols, Silent Night and all those classics. And obviously the British soldiers, they can hear that, because in some instances you are literally in shouting distance, or if not talking distance, because some of these trenches are quite close together. So they're hearing it. They go, what's going on over there? Well, the Germans are singing again. But this time they're singing Christmas carols. And so I think with that, it's Christmas Eve. Oh, well, let's have a go then. So the British soldiers start singing some German carols, because obviously there's a lot of German carols that translate, vice versa. So even if you don't understand the language, you understand the tune. So they was obviously either start singing along with the Germans, or they'll sing their own carols and things like that, and start shouting a bit of verbal over to him, or what some people might call banter.
Definitely. I know we had a bit of that in the trench event as well, going back to that. So
yeah, it did actually. Yeah, because that's how. But again, that just started out the blue. We were sat there in the trench, and we heard the German singing, and then we just joined in, and that's exactly how it just. And that's exactly how it happened back in 1914.
The sort of nice organic nature of it is just brilliant, and you sort of get. Obviously, you won't get the full sense of it, but you get a sort of an inkling of like, Christ, this is what it could like sort of been like. So, which is what I love about the whole thing.
Absolutely,
definitely. So we'll quickly take a break here, and then we'll get back in and we'll talk about sort of the sort of attributes and activities that some people got up to on Christmas Day.
If you're enjoying this podcast and want access to exclusive content, early access to our monthly feature documentary and private podcasts, amongst many other benefits, then consider joining our Patreon from as little as £1. By doing so, you'll get access to all these features, plus your support will help us to keep history alive. Hit the link in the description of this episode and navigate to our Patreon to sign up.
Hi, welcome back to the Contemptibles. Thank you to our sponsor. And now we're going to get back in talking about the activities and some of the actions that happened on Christmas Day in 1914. It wasn't all bells and whistles and peace and love and harmony to men, but we're going to talk about some of those things and also if anything bad as well happened, really. But Pete, let's hand it over to you.
Yeah, so you said it weren't all it weren't all goodwill to all men by any stretch of imagination. So again, like just quickly touching back on the Christmas Eve, it's very well documented. The Germans were putting candles in like jam jars and put them on the parapet of the trench. Obviously, naturally, that'll make our lads a bit suspicious. Like, oh, what are they bloody up to then? And it was an officer from the Rifle Brigade. He was actually he was down on Pulse Point, down Plug Street way. I think he was actually at the birdcage as well. I think, don't quote me on that, but I think he might have been. And he saw these like tea lights being set up along the parapet, and he told the lads to shoot them. So it's like that put a stop to any of that, didn't it? But yeah, so let's move to Christmas Day. So Christmas Day comes, they had their, in some areas they had their little sing song and whatnot. So the routine is start like any other day with the British soldier. He's doing stand 2 at first light. So he's done his stand 2, then they're going into their weapon cleaning. So obviously very important to keep your rifle functioning, especially with all the mud and muck and everything. So he's probably cleaning his rifle at least 3-4 times a day, or at least 8 times in a 24-hour period. So he's doing his rifle cleaning, add a little bit of food, whatever they've brought up for them, or if they've had to go into their normal ration of biscuit and bully, gone through orders of the day, and start their work. So that's basically how their day would have started. Their day would have started like any other day. Obviously, being Christmas Day, in these areas where these little truces did happen. So in some areas, doesn't matter who started it first, because it was almost like in this instance, it's like one was bad as the other. They would shout over to him like, "Happy Christmas, Jerry," or be like, "Happy Christmas, Tommy," all the rest of it, or they paint a little sign or something and wave it above the trench or something. Just again, bit of banter, and they're bored. They're bored. They want to try and entertain themselves. So they got that odd exchange of verbal in those areas where you could actually shout over to them. And again, they're then going into their routines again. They're just trying to pass the time the best they can. What I've gathered from where I've been looking at the Christmas truce, it seems that the Germans have instigated quite a lot of it, as in the truce kind of happening. It's not on the sort of the British side saying, "Oh, we got up out of our trench and asked them if we could have a ceasefire." I haven't really found any of that through looking through things. It just seems to be more the Germans are the ones that sort of, you get the odd couple of Germans will come out waving their hands or with a white flag coming out to no man's land. They're stopping them. So when they come up, obviously, again, our lads instantly suspicious, so they call a stand 2. So they call their stand 2, and they see these Germans walk across, but then they see that they haven't actually got a rifle with them. They're walking out with either their hands up or they're waving with both hands or whatever. Obviously, then stop them about halfway, because obviously they don't want them coming any closer, because they don't want them seeing their trenches, like happened to one German who come over with a white flag. He come walking over, and they let him get too close, and they actually let him into the trench. And he goes, "Oh, we'd like to have a truce for, a truce today. We just don't want to fire at anyone today, or we want a couple of hours, something along those lines." Anyway, the end of end all, they want to stop firing for Christmas Day. And the commanding officer turned around and was like, "Well, yeah, that's all well and good, but you can't go back and tell your mates because you're a prisoner now." Because he saw the line. He
Yeah.
saw where our machine gun positions were and things like that. So it's like he can't go back. So he's gone back with information. But if they'd have brought him in blindfolded and sat him there all blindfolded, it wouldn't have been a problem. But because the lads let him walk over, they're like, yeah, come in, mate. Yeah, no worries, sit down. Oh yeah, well, yeah, no problem. We'll have a truce. Yeah, well, right, send him back. But yeah, so these, so initially when it sort of started, there'd be, so they'd come out, a representing officer would come out and have a chat with us, and usually it was like a couple of hours. So they said, look, can we just knock it on the head for half a day or something like that, just so we can just chill out and have a day off. Because you remember some of these Germans, they're regular soldiers as well. Because obviously conscription's quite heavy in Germany, like there's quite a lot of them. But they're in the same situation as what we are. They're cold, they're wet, they're fed up as well. So they're like, so we have that mutual agreement. It's like, yeah, no worries, we'll just knock it on the head for a few hours. In places like the birdcage. That's also another ulterior motive to that as well, because obviously where these offences have gone up in the lead up to to Christmas Day, the lads are going, hang on a minute, the Germans are asking us to have a little bit of a ceasefire. Well, how about we get out there and try and bring some of our lads back in and get them buried? Because they're just sat out there, aren't they? They've been sat out there for over a week. Yeah. Out there in the cold and all the rest of it. So they want to bring their mates back in and get them buried.
Exactly.
So obviously we then started doing, and the Germans were doing the same, because obviously the Germans were, they're trying to push us out as well. So it then starts in these areas where this sort of stuff happened, is that we ended up burying our lads with the Germans. So obviously then they start chatting to each other, don't they? So although they're burying the dead, they got that conversation kind of. They might not be able to understand what the bloke's saying, but everyone understands a bit of sign language, don't they?
Exactly.
And they always know what the British bloke's always on about, because he shouts louder.
He's asking, "Don't take my sunbed," I think.
Yeah. So all these little things happening. So they bury the dead. So they have the church service as well. There was one that was quite well documented, where there was a collaboration of Germans and Brits all together with their padres, and there's a joint service done. So they buried the dead. So they buried them over, and they actually had a service of remembrance for the lads that they just buried, and they all sort of went their kind of different ways. And that's how it all then started escalating. Yeah. And because they got this ceasefire, they're like, hang on a minute, we were chatting to them a minute ago, burying our lads. Well, I wonder if they want to, if they just go and have a little stretch our legs a bit. So that's how it all then kind of starts, is that they then start, like, basically people are getting very confident, because obviously that both sides are very distrusting each other, because up until now they're shooting at each other.
Yeah.
So they're coming out. So with that, they're coming out, they're going, waving, or they're brandishing a bottle or something like that, and waving a bottle of booze at a British soldier. It's like, hang on a minute, he's waving a bottle of booze there.
Exactly. Waste not, want not.
Exactly. So then they're going out. So yeah, come on, we'll have your exotic snaps. And that's how it starts. We like to have Christmas drink, then it all start. That's how this is all starting. All these little incidents are going on, all in these little pockets. And it then escalates, and suddenly, before you know it, your whole company's up. I will say your whole company, but a lot of your lads are already up. Same with the German side as well. And then you're starting to chat to each other.
Yeah.
And that's literally how. So it's not. It's something that's just escalating. It's just something that's escalating. And then after that, as soon as it starts getting dark, or it's coming up to the curfew time, as in like the ceasefire, everyone's like, right, let's go back to our trench. So that's, to me, that is the Christmas. Obviously, they're exchanging gifts as well. And the other thing you got as well, there's in some of these German regiments, some of these Germans actually lived in England. There are waiters, barbers, tailors, people like that. But when the war started, they felt it their patriotic duty to go back to Germany to go and fight for Germany. So you got these blokes who, they're then shaving them. These German barbers are now shaving British soldiers. Give them a shave, give them a haircut, because that's their trade.
because I
there was
know
one-
one conversation was a German soldier was talking to a British soldier and was talking about his time when he was a waiter at the Savoy and
Yeah.
things along that lines as well. And he was asking questions, "Oh, how is it there back now?" and all these sort of things.
Yeah, another incident was a bloke from the London Rifle Brigade. So this bloke from the London Rifle Brigade, he crossed paths with a German who was basically he was pretty much born. He was born in England. So obviously London Rifle Brigade come from London, and he what I can remember, what he was saying when he was recollecting it, it was he just heard this voice in a London accent, and he turned around, and it was like, and there's a bloke in a German uniform. He goes, "You British?" And he's like, "No, mate, I'm German, but you know." But he said he had the accent and everything. He did. He stood there talking in a London accent, but he was wearing a German uniform. But it then transpired that this bloke literally lived within like a mile of him before the war started.
So that reminds me of a story from the Second World War of a guy who was born in, I think it was just outside Winchester way, so in Hampshire, and he'd moved out to Germany in just the post World War I period, and he'd married out there, he had kids, etc. And then when the Second World War started, he was conscripted into the German army, and it was in Salerno where he was captured by, I think, men of the Hampshires, and he basically, but when he got captured, he basically, "Oh, thank God, that's the war over for me then." And they were like, "What?" And he was like, "Yeah, I'm from England and etc." And he's like, "Yeah, I got conscripted." And yeah, and there's a brilliant picture of him literally just smiling to the camera just after he's been captured, because he's like, "Thank God, this is all bloody over now. I don't have to do this crap." And it's hilarious, and there's like a whole thing about it, and they record what he said. And after you send that off to you maybe one time with these sort of details, but it's a brilliant little story. And there's obviously that's Second World War, but it sort of resonates with like stuff during the first and post the Second World War as well.
Oh yeah, you do hear about it. You know, when wars start, they'll go back and fight for their own country. You know, just how it is. Yeah, they feel their patriotic duties to their sort of motherland, so to speak. Yeah, so yeah, you get all these, but those little anecdotes are brilliant. I think when you come when you come across them.
Yeah, exactly, definitely. And I think with the whole of the Christmas truce, it's sort of like a little I think for a lot of people, it's a little droplet of hope in sort of the whole mess that was sort of the First World War. But in the same sort of thing, it's like it's kind of a natural thing that would happen, really, because as we've said already in this episode, these, like, especially within the regards to the British, it was a case of they want the day off. They'd had enough for a while. They just like, even if it's for a few hours, just so I don't have the fear of a whiz bang coming down and knocking me out or whatever. And it's just a case of just like a sense of, we'll do what we need to do and then we'll get back to it afterwards, but just give us this time to just have a bit of time to ourselves, really, which I think is just, it's human. It's absolutely human.
It is, yeah.
And the same resonates with the Germans as well, or the French or the Belgians. Obviously, as I said before, it wasn't so much a case with the French and the Belgians, because it was more of a case of these guys are on our land. It did happen. There's accounts of like French soldiers and German soldiers sliding presents across the river that was in between their lines, and things along that lines as well. But I think it's kind of understandable from their point of view why it didn't happen as frequently as it did with the British, just because it was a different kind of they're in my garden kind of aspect. So,
but then I think also the other thing. Sorry,
that's absolutely fine.
I think the other thing as well is the cultural similarities between us and the Germans.
Exactly. Yeah.
Culturally, we're quite similar. I think. In the last century, our own queen was married to a German, and
exactly.
Our entire Christmas is founded on Germanness.
exactly, and so like Kaiser Wilhelm is the cousin of the king, and the other cousin is the Tsar of Russia, and it's a crazy thing. And considering with the history where Germany,
it's almost like a Family Feud.
God, it is. It's like a big episode of Family Feuds on telly. It's crazy, but like you got to take into account of like the history that the French had with the Germans for the past 50 years has been very, very rocky. The Franco-Prussian War, and
Oh, absolutely.
that had left such a bitter taste with the seizing of Alsace, the region of Alsace-Lorraine, and then going in with the Great War, it becomes even more bitter. So you can tell why this sort of thing happens a lot with British and German troops, and the same in kind of aspect to similar things that happened on the Gallipoli Peninsula as well, say between Commonwealth troops and the Turks. That kind of sort of playing around of kind of things when the sort of the dull sort of times and the sort of messages and the sort of like banter that went back and forth between them. Obviously, not on the scale or the sort of general meeting and greeting friendliness that was known during the Christmas truce, but that sort of thing resonates there as well. I think there's a case of quite a lot you see throughout the years, really, throughout the centuries with the British Army and its sort of adversaries. There's a case of mutual what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of mutual respect.
Yeah.
In that sort of way. Yes, of the enemy, and sometimes it can get really bitter, but there's a case of mutual respect there, really.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that's also down to the professionalism as well.
Exactly, yeah.
Because I think with the British soldier, that pre-war regular, he doesn't care who he's going to go and fight. He's being paid either way. Either direction his rifle's pointed, he's being paid to do it, and he's good at it. So when war was declared in 1914, he could quite happily have just gone off and fought the French or even the Belgians. It wouldn't have bothered him at all. It just so happened that they were fighting the Germans. He was being paid to fight the Germans. And like you said, there's that mutual respect there because they didn't have like a dislike of the Germans, really. They probably disliked their government's policies.
Yeah. And I think, yeah.
But the actual German soldier, he doesn't really have any animosity at all to him. He's doing the same job exactly the same as what he's doing.
Yeah, exactly.
On different sides, different sides of the fence. And I think with that professionalism with the British soldier of the time, I think that's why he could quite easily gone up there, shook their hand, have a little chat, and then the next day start shooting at me again.
Exactly, because
he's very good at what he does.
Exactly, because I think especially like the sort of like that early war propaganda that was sort of set up on it from truths and from sort of fiction as well. I would say mostly affected the new volunteer army that was coming in. Not necessarily the pre-war regulars, because they were like, yeah, we've sort of seen most of it. It's not really that much of a case, but they're just getting there. They're just there to do a job. But I say that sort of the spark to the flame that lit so many fuses to get all the volunteer force coming in. That's what sort of sparked that. So again, as you said,
and also the other thing you got as well with the again, you got the territorials as well, but a lot of the territorials, they're professional territorials because obviously they're pre-war territorials. But the vast majority of them have joined the territorials because they went away on a summer camp for 2 weeks every year. Exactly. Where else were they going to go anywhere for free for 2 weeks? That's somewhere else in the country. Exactly. That was a lot of them. That's why they joined the territorials. Some of them signed up for Imperial service, which they did do, like in the Boer War.
Yeah.
But for a lot of them, they're like 17, 18-year-old lads who, there's no real entertainment like it is for a 17, 18-year-old today.
Exactly.
Where they can go off, do this, that, and the other. What else are they going to do? Oh, no, I'll go and join the territorials because I'll go to the drill hall once a week. That keeps me occupied on a Tuesday night.
Yeah.
That keeps me occupied on a Tuesday. At the weekend, if I'm not working, we're probably going to be on exercise or something, doing something exciting and interesting.
Exactly. And getting paid for the privilege to do it as well.
And getting paid to do it as well, yeah. But then when we come into like the volunteers, obviously you've got the Patriots who in 1914 are going, yep, I am going to go and fight for my country. Yep, fair enough. But then you get people like the Kitchener Volunteers when we're coming into like 1915 with these volunteers that are joining is because they actually got a hatred for the Germans because it's maybe their father, their brother, or their uncle has been killed by them.
Yeah.
So there's that hatred's already installed in them. It's one of those things through history. How are you going to recruit people to fight someone? Well, it's because you've killed a relative of theirs, a close relative.
Yeah.
That's why they're going to go and fight you. So when they get to the Western Front, they have no interest in shaking hands with them. They want to kill them because they want to right the wrong that's been done to them.
Exactly.
And I think that's a big thing as well. When people are saying like, "Why didn't this happen ever again?" Well, there's one of your answers right there.
Exactly. Is that because the sort of attitude had changed, and not obviously with the high brass doing what they did post all these events to crack down on it ever happened again really as well. But as you've just said, like the attitude and the feelings had changed so much from those early days of sort of the honeymoon period of, say, relations in the way of like between soldier to soldier, to that sort of more blood sort of thirsty attitude you get with, say, Somme, following on from there really.
Exactly. When 1915 comes along, there's some big offensives.
Yeah.
So so we are getting those losses, but so it's but let's talk about what everybody wants us to talk about. Bloody football. Oh, don't get me started on the bloody football. Jesus. Oh,
did they have professional goalkeepers and referees?
Yeah, if you like, mate. Yeah. Yeah. We got to touch on this because people be screaming
Exactly,
at their device what they're listening to this. So, what about the football? What about the football? Well, to be quite honest, I'd rather not talk about the football. But unfortunately, we got to.
Yeah, we do really, we do. Obviously, there are sort of accounts of games happening, but not to the extent as it's sort of like romanticized in, say, media or adverts, films, TV, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So if Pete, do you want to go into a little bit more of that, because you know way more than I do on that sort of subject itself.
But yeah, so yes, it was documented that football matches did happen, but the problem is with modern society and the way they've interpreted the history.
Yeah.
Is they think everybody got out their trench, stopped for the day, and they all had one big football match. Or in these places where these truces happened, everyone had a football. Where are you going to find a football for a start?
Yeah, the 250,000 aside football game. Yeah.
But yeah, like I say, it has been well documented as one of the Highland regiments, one of the Scottish regiments. That was very well. That is documented that they, for some bizarre reason, they actually did have a football in the trench room.
Must be a Celtic fan.
Yeah, must have been. Yeah, or Rangers.
Yeah, definitely. We must be fair.
Yes, we must be fair. Yeah, so they had a football and they did have a kickabout. But then the other thing as well is like people think it was like this proper sort of organised thing. It was like, the Greys and the Khakis.
Yeah.
But it weren't. It was like any kickabout that happened, it most likely just been a tin can. Or if they did have a football, it would just been a bit of a knockabout.
Exactly.
There's one German said from a German perspective, they said they saw some blokes kicking a can about, but it was just the Tommies amongst each other just kicking it around. They weren't invited any Germans to have a kickabout with them. It was just them having a little. But that was like 6 blokes like kicking it around. Yeah. But also you got the embellishment as well. So again, the media got hold of it. That's obviously the post-truce where these photographs. Obviously, it's been photographed as well. So that's the only reason we know the truce happened, because it was photographed as well.
Yeah.
In some of these places. So the media got hold of it, and again, the media does what it does best. It embellishes the truth. It's like why let the facts get in the way of a good story?
Yeah,
and that's another thing as well. So with that, move it forward 100 years to the centenary. So you already had that from 1940, and then how it's all been perceived in schools and things like up until that point. But then we hit the 100 years of the Christmas truce, and then bang, it all gets embellished even more. So everyone has this perception of this is what the truce was. It wasn't what it was at all. I say that most have been a tin can. I think it was the Rifle Brigade. They didn't use a tin can. They found a dead rabbit and they started kicking that around amongst each other. Why not?
What a lovely sight.
Yeah. But these are men, they've seen a lot in the last few months, these blokes. They've seen a lot.
Exactly.
So kicking a dead rabbit around ain't really going to bother them, is it?
Exactly.
Yeah, I remember right. The only reason they stopped was because it started falling to bits.
Oh, God.
Yeah, that was the only reason why they stopped kicking it around. But there's the other thing as well. You also got embellished. When I said about embellishing the truth, is like you got blokes making stuff up as well.
Yeah.
So there was a bloke in a field hospital. He was sat there and he was recovering from wounds, and he turned around and said, "Oh yeah, I was there Christmas Day, yeah." And everyone's going, "Was you? Oh yeah, big football game and everything." And obviously the nurses have heard about this, and they're gone, "Well, we got someone who witnessed the big football matches that were going on. Oh, we'll get a reporter." So reporter comes in for the local press, sit there at the hospital talking to him. "So you saw the Christmas truce?" "Oh yeah." Transpired that this bloke, his regiment weren't even at the front at that point. They were behind the line at that point. While the truce was going on.
It's sort of like the book is. It's sort of like the book. "Oh yeah, I've got a yacht tied up in London Harbour." It's like, oh God.
Yeah, well, let's see it then.
Here we go. Is Mr. Walter Mitty himself.
Yeah. So
I love it.
He obviously sat there like thinking, he obviously sat there thinking it was like, yeah, it'll give me a little bit of attention, or he just thought, "Oh, wouldn't it be funny if I just says I was there?" But then it was a joke that went too far, maybe.
You're thinking, I might be able to get a better nurse out of this. You never know. And then no.
And then like you said before, the 2000 aside football game.
Yeah.
So no man's land isn't the quagmire again what people believe it to be, because remember we're still quite early in the war. Artillery isn't in the abundance that it is. So when they're looking over to no man's land, it's meadows pretty much.
Exactly.
It's all like it's either it's agricultural land, and some of them still got the crops growing in it.
Yeah.
So if you've got 2,000 blokes stood in the middle of no man's land watching a football game, that's going to draw quite a lot of attention. Doesn't matter where you're stood along that line. If you can see that, wherever, like if you're on the flanks of that, so you got other battalions along that line who might not be taking part in the truces, but they might be an eye shot of that battalion. But 2,000 blokes to the middle of a field, that's going to draw a lot of attention,
Exactly.
and there's going to be a lot more letters going home going, "You won't guess what I saw yesterday, mother."
Young Jimmy was
in the field.
Young Jimmy was frolicking with some Germans.
Yeah, playing football.
Yeah,
we're sat there playing football. Couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe my eyes. Never seen anything like it all my life. But we don't see any of that really.
Exactly.
With these recollections that have come back, or these reports that have come back in letters and diary entries as well, it's usually handfuls. It's like a few boats here, a few boats there. Maybe a company went up, a company's worth of blokes went out, had a look. Because obviously not all the blokes are too keen on going to talk to the Germans either, especially these lads like down in the birdcage who within 5 days before, they were fighting to take the birdcage about 5 days before.
Yeah.
And they're going to be sat there going, "No, mate."
Exactly.
You can do one. Like I said, like that officer did from the from the Rifle Brigade, where he said he saw their Christmas lights going up along the parapet, and he was like, "Shoot them."
Exactly.
Because they weren't interested. They'd been in a big engagement, and they were still a bit sore from it.
Exactly. You can't blame him. You can't blame him because you've been in that mindset for so long.
Of course.
It's like, why are we going to play Happy Families now? But
exactly.
It's definitely just down to personal experiences. But and obviously there was accounts of similar things happening up until New Year's Day. Obviously on smaller and smaller scales as the days went on, really. But little things did happen. Yes,
they did. So we got majority of places it was Christmas Day. It was Christmas Day, and that was it. But what they kind of did was like an official truce where they went, "Look, we won't come out the trenches, but we just won't shoot at each other until New Year." And they're gone, "Yeah, all right then, no problem." So that's what they did. So they weren't going out to meet each other. They were it was a live, let live policy up until New Year. So in that time, again, with those professional soldiers, the British Army, they're going, "All right, I can't shoot you, you can't shoot at me. We can do a lot of work to this trench in the course of a few days. We got up until New Year. We can get a hell of a lot done because we're not now confined to the trench. We can get out the trench and actually start revetting stuff and actually moving around a lot better to actually get this built up better than what it should be.
Exactly.
But then the other thing as well is they agree to this. So they go, yep, no problem. Like I said, they're starting these rotations, that 48-hour rotation.
Yeah.
So that regiment might have come off. No, that regiment's now come off the line. So could have been that night. So Christmas Day evening, when they went, ta-da, Jerry, lovely to meet you. Got back to the trench. Orders came up when it got dark. They went, right, you lads have been moved out now. You got a rotation happening. And then you got another battalion moved. So it could be another battalion or indeed another company that's come in who know nothing about this truce, what's going on. It might have been in the handover. The command officer would have given a handover and said, look, up until New Year, we said we're going to have a bit of let-live policy until New Year. Some of them have gone, yeah, okay, I can see where you're going from with that. Or others have gone, no, you're having a laugh, aren't you? And they'll just start shooting at them. and that also then goes into why the truce finished as well, because of these rotations that were happening.
Yeah.
These rotations are happening. So you're getting fresh blokes into the line. Some are actually, or you got a whole battalion being withdrawn off, and you've got a different battalion going in they've been set off the line for a week. They ain't seen, heard nothing of any of this. So they turn up, see Germans walking around. Like, oh, we can have a go at this. And so, and also words getting back to the brass as well. That's the other thing. So though, the brigade commanders, the division commanders, the corps commanders, and obviously ultimately Sir John French, that they're starting to hear all these reports of fraternization with the enemy. Obviously, big no-no. I can't remember which general it was now, but he reprimands. He turned around, he goes, I want officers' names, and he wanted them court-martialed. He was saying, like, I want these blokes who were instigators in this, who went out there with their blokes to talk to them, who should have put a stop to it. I want them on court-martialed. Nothing happened, apparently. It all sort of got swept, blown away. But yeah, the big boys were starting to hear about it, and they were like, right, okay, then you think you're having your truce or your ceasefire until New Year's Day? No way, you are you. So they then start telling them, right, you're doing a trench raid. You're going down for a trench raid, or they'll get the artillery up. So they go, right, throw some rounds into that trench, just into that German line over there. Just throw a load of rounds in. So, and also the Germans are doing that as well. So it's not just us stopping it. Yeah. The German high commanders now hearing about this as well, and they're doing exactly the same as what our high commander doing. They're going, what truce? What truce? Throw some shells over to them. So it's not so much then the blokes stopping the truce; it's the artillery. Because it's then going back into that cycle of, my mate's just been killed by artillery fire. The Germans did that. Yeah. And it's then going back into, and that's how it's, pretty much slipped, how it slipped back into that cycle of actually going back to war. But like I said, with the professional British soldier, he had no qualms with that. He's like, well, I've had my truce, so that's all right. I'll start shooting again tomorrow, no problem. Because, like I said, they were hard fighting, hard drinking soldiers, and they were very, very good at what they did. And it was their job, it was their profession. And so it was like, well, it's just not occupational hazard that you're at the other end of my rifle, really.
No, exactly. And I think that sort of rounds up to sort of a great way to sort of end it, really, because obviously there barely has anything similar to this on this scale happening anywhere else during the war. As I said, there's little bits of similar things happening.
Yeah, you get it in
Gallipoli, and I think there's similar things that happened on the Eastern Front as well with the Russians, and elsewhere around the world as well. But in the case of
there was some little incidences Christmas 1915.
Yeah.
Where the British, not all the British, that again, this is very, very, very minimal, where they tried to do something, but they were like, no, ain't happening. So it was, there was that intent by some people, but to say that, yes, they did try and do another truce is Not, no, that's completely wrong. It's one of them. It's a very, very, very small amount of blokes
Yeah,
who did try it, but it never escalated to nothing.
yeah,
at all.
exactly. Yeah, I think it. But it sort of shows a sort of those little bits in history which are just like some things can happen, but it's yeah. But as I was saying, I think that was a really, really good episode, and I really, really hope you guys who've been listening have enjoyed. We'll be doing similar things in the way of different accounts of different things that happened throughout the Great War, Second War, and so on and before and beyond as well. So if you've got any questions, please contact us through our different channels, either through TikTok, through YouTube, through Facebook, etc. And if you wish to donate, there'll be a PayPal link in the description below. Any donation will be very, very helpful. It goes towards helping fund them with the podcast, and with if we need to travel to places to do little walk arounds and museums, etc. It helps with fuel and all those sort of things. So really, really hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much to Pete Neal for coming onto this. I really, really appreciate it. And his wealth of knowledge on this subject is brilliant. And hopefully we'll do some more in the future. So thank you again for listening, and bye for now.